Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of eXhuming the X-Files here on the Outpost Unknown YouTube channel. It is Friday, and hit that like and subscribe because every Friday, up through 218 episodes of this show, we will be talking about the X-Files. My name is Matthew, joined once again by Jeremy.
That's me.
Okay, Jeremy, setting the stage for the episode we're going to talk about tonight, Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose, directed by David Nutter, written by Mr. Darren Morgan. Darren Morgan, I think I sent you an article. I don't know if you actually had time to read it or not. Darren Morgan was the guy who actually played the Fluke Man and the host. He was actually in the suit. But he's most notable for writing, I think, every episode of The X-Files he wrote, which is only 4 episodes, are considered like all-time classics. So Humbug, which I think was both in our top lists of season 2. That's the one with kind of like the carnival freak show episode, which had a lot of humor into it. This was his second episode that he wrote for X-Files. And many people consider this to be like the best episode of X-Files ever. Just in terms of like writing ability, acting, the cinematography of it, the just all of it. Now, whether or not we will agree with that, we'll find out as we go through it. But I was curious, did you remember anything about this episode before you had actually seen it?
Nope, not a thing. Felt
Oh wow.
great to
Okay.
watch
So
it though.
so we're gonna get like a kind of like a raw reaction from you after seeing this. I had actually remembered this episode because I had actually seen it a number of times. I'd actually gone back over the years to revisit this and show this to people because I consider this episode a companion piece with an episode that shows up later this season called Quagmire. And I have, when we get there, I think it's episode 20 or something like that of the season. When we get there, remind me to tell you the story about Quagmire that involves me coming back from Kearney in driver's ed class, driving back to Aurora in driver's ed from Kearney, um, regarding Quagmire. And so these two episodes, there's something that happens that I'll get to it here. There's a, we'll call it a character that's introduced in this that I feel like these are perfect bookends. These two episodes are perfect bookends to one another. So I always show this episode to people who are like, "Hey, what's the X Files all about?" Over the years, like, "Well, check out this episode. Do you like this one?" Then you're gonna get into the X Files, but we'll see if you agree or not. So let's talk about Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose. Let's just get right into it because I'm sure we're gonna have a lot to say.
So it begins with older fella. Can't remember. I've seen the actor in
Peter
tons of stuff.
Boyle.
Peter Boyle, and he's standing at the checkout aisle in the grocery store, staring really close at the faux National Enquirer that's sitting there, and he's making predictions based off of the cover on all of these different things. It's just random kind of spewing about the future for this stuff, but he just comes across as kind of a weird, kooky guy. And Lord knows we all just kind of looked at those National Enquirers because we were
Yeah.
weirdos or as we were kids.
Well, you and I
And
loved Weekly World News.
yes, oh my god,
Big into Weekly World News. Bat Boy.
uh, he gets or he walks out of the store with his groceries, almost run, or he doesn't quite run into this guy, but they do that thing where you meet somebody in a hallway or something and you both go left, you both go right, you both go left, and then you finally get around each other.
Yeah.
And there's this great line from the guy that's with him. It's like, hey, at least you're a better dancer than my last date. And he walks on. It's like, I love that sort of stuff. It was just a throwaway line, but
Yeah.
it's like, okay, this episode already has charm in it, and the
Well,
people in it are charming.
yeah, and I like Peter Boyle when he's interacting with the person at the gas station. He's like a lotto ticket and a pint of malt Scotch whiskey. It's just the way that he's acting. He looks so defeated with life that all he's got is whiskey and hopefully winning a lotto ticket.
And so you think it's going to be about the old guy or Peter Boyle as he walks away, but no, we focus in on his dance partner from just a few seconds ago. His dance partner walks into a fortune teller shop. You could tell because there's like a sign outside that has like tarot reading or some shit like that on it. And so he's talking to this gal and he's kind of monotone and he's like, I need you to tell me why I'm having these problems. She's like, well, I'm not a fucking psychologist. Like, you could tell that they're advanced into their conversation. We're not
Yeah,
seeing at the beginning of the reading, but you can tell that she's annoyed with the things that this dude is asking her.
yeah. Why am I going to be
Because,
doing the things I'm going to be doing?
yeah, why am I going to? Why do I have the urges to do these things? And like, I think he's holding her hands or vice versa. Yeah, no, she's reading his palms. That's what it was.
Yeah,
And he ends up like, while his hands are being held, he wraps his hands around hers and just starts squeezing the shit out of him. And she's struggling and trying to get away.
she's like, "You're
And
hurting me. You're hurting
yeah,
me."
it's like you should. What's like what was it? You should have seen or
He says, "I know, I'm sorry, but you're a fortune teller. You should
so.
have seen this coming."
And
And
it
this
was,
this actor's great.
oh my god, it
Like,
was chilling.
like X Files does a really good job of casting when they cast their serial killers, just like the creepiest, weirdest dudes. Like, I don't know what that casting call is like. Like, we're looking for creepy, weird, curly haired dude with weird eyeballs that looks
And
like a
they
killer.
found them.
Oh yeah, he's so good in it. And that's kind of like the prologue. And this prologue is so fucking good. Like it hits everything that you want in an X
Oh,
Files
pre-title
prologue.
screen? Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's
And
so good.
like as soon as he delivered that line, like he was straight up blaming her for what was about to happen to her because she should have known. Like, and then he
Yeah.
gets on top of her. Like, you get this zoom out where he kills her, and then it cuts to the title screen.
Yeah,
Delicious.
it's
I
a
was hooked
perfect,
from that moment.
perfect prologue. Perfect prologue.
And so, well, just getting right into it. Um, these cops are standing around the crime scene and they're talking about somebody that they had called in. And what did they call him? It's like, oh yeah, they're talking about, so yeah, we got this weirdo coming in that helps with these things sometimes. You
Yeah.
think he's talking about Mulder?
Yeah.
I think the line is, as long as he gives us leads, I don't care how big a kook he is.
Yeah. But that's what's brilliant about this scene because it's like we've seen this before. But yeah, like that's why the writing of Darren Morgan is so great because we have seen this in previous episodes of X Files where people are like, oh god, kooky Mulder, spooky Mulder, right? Spooky. He's all helping on your case. We've seen that all the way back to season one. And so you see these cops, Minneapolis PD, saying the exact same things, and then you're like, okay, well, it's way too obvious here that it's not really gonna be Mulder. And then who walks in the door? It's
Mulder,
Mulder. And you're like, oh. And then they're like immediately like, who are you?
hell are
And then
you?
it's just the way that it's written and how it's executed is perfect. Like it's just such a small thing, but it like subverts your expectations on a small way. Most people think of subverting expectations in a film as like this major event, like oh my god, I didn't see that coming. But Darren Morgan writes it in such a way it's just a small moment of subverting your expectations, which was just great.
Mulder identifies himself, um, but he's clearly not the kook. This other guy,
The
like,
stupendous yuppie.
yeah, this TV Miss Cleo, like, psychic shows up, and he's walking in at the head of this entourage where people are like, Yappy, Yappy, come talk to. And he looks around the room. He starts just immediately talking bullshit, like killers, all this very vague stuff. And then at some point, he's like, I feel negative energy. Somebody is blocking me.
Well, he's like, it's gone, it's gone. Like, and to describe this guy, he's like his eyebrows going up. He's jerking his head left and right, looking at people. I mean, it's just bizarre how this guy is kind of acting. But yeah, that's the thing. Like, they're showing Mulder and Scully, and Mulder is not having this, right? He doesn't believe like any of this shit is actually going on. Scully doesn't either. But yeah, he's like, oh, sorry, cops, I've lost it. Someone's giving off that negative energy. And I love how he looks directly at Scully first. And that's the thing about this episode. There's so much great comedic timing in this. Because with that prologue, you're thinking, oh, wow, okay, this is a serious thing here. This is creepy. This is weird. But then there's these moments of just humor and sarcasm throughout this episode that somehow makes it all work with the serious crap going on. And he jerks his head and looks at Scully, and Gillian Anderson gives that reaction like, "Whoop," and he gets like right up into her face like he's about to sniff her or something.
Yeah.
And he looks right over at Mulder, and he's like, "You give off negative energy." It's so
And they
funny. Like I'm
make him
laughing.
leave. Despite Mulder being the only like true believer in
He
the
tells
room.
him that
Sure.
too. He's like, "I believe in psychic ability."
He's like, "But you're still blocking me, you get out." And he stands outside. The dude like puts on a performance show for the cops. The cops just have like he has a beard or he does not have a beard. He is 17 to 35, like this biggest fucking crock of shit. But then the dude walks out, the what are the fantabulous yappy, and like looks at Mulder, and Mulder tells him that line. He's like, "Hey, read this thought."
Well, he tells him, he's like, "You skeptics make me sick." And then he's like, "Mr. Yappy, can you read this thought?" And you
And what
just
is
see,
I rewound it 3 times and I couldn't figure out what the hell he was saying. Did he say "so's your mom"? And
I don't know
walks.
what he said. I couldn't understand it either. I don't know if he was just making the verbal like, "Oh," like he couldn't believe, like, because he makes a reaction like he knows what Mulder was saying or something in his head.
No,
Um,
the closest I could make it, because I went back 3 times. I didn't have subtitles, but I went back 3 times and it sounds like he's saying "so's your mom."
huh.
But
I might pull it up and see what the subtitles say.
be worth it. And then he passes. Thank God, out of the story for the rest of the episode. I thought he was just going to be in it. Like this whack ass clown was just going to keep on fucking up the investigation. Thankfully, he doesn't.
He's so funny though. He's so funny.
Uh, it cuts back to the salesman. He's trying to sell some life insurance to a couple, like a young married couple, no kids. And they're like, "Well, we don't really, want to spend the money on that because I want a boat." And then this guy, fucking Doyle, gets so dark. He's like, "Well, I know that sounds like a short term thing, but in 2 years, you're gonna get like run over by a drunk driver in a Mustang, and you're gonna pass away." And he's giving all of these like you're coming, or Doyle, the guy who is reading from the National Enquirer at the beginning. He is an actual psychic, and what his psychic power is he can see how you die, and he's
Yeah.
also this door to door insurance salesman, life insurance salesman. And he just straight tells this guy in detail how he's gonna die. He's like, "You need to really work on your closer," or something like
Yeah.
that.
Just these great understated lines of humor. And then as soon as the guy said it, it cuts away to the next scene.
And
It's
he's
just
in his apartment. Like he doesn't have a good life. He just has this ho hum kind of depressed life. He opens up his refrigerator, and I wrote down that he has about the same reaction that I have when I pull a bag of lettuce out of the fridge. Just like, oh god.
well, before he gets to his apartment though, remember he walks by the other his neighbor, doesn't he? Because he has that flash vision of the Pomeranian like eating her because he knows she's gonna die. And remember he like kicks the
Oh,
dog or whatever.
I thought he went after, because he sees the head in the bag, or in the lettuce bag, and then he
Oh,
like
okay,
throws
maybe
it
I
away. I think he throws the head of lettuce away, and then he goes across the hall because he's going to throw the old lady's trash out across the way, because
oh, gotcha.
she
Okay, I
can't
got
get
it mixed up.
around real well. And what a bitch! Like he was just being nice, and she's just like, "Just fucking take out my trash man." But they don't dwell on it. And there is the little dog, and he does see the brief thing, but then he goes out to the trash itself, the dumpster itself, and that's where he sees like the bedazzled, bejeweled hand is covered in rings and bracelets of
Yeah.
one of the fortune tellers that had been recently murdered.
Yep.
So he they talk to, or they end up finding out that this guy makes a call. Like he didn't examine the body, but the eyes had been gouged out, and they had been, or she had been disemboweled. And the insurance salesman Boyle doesn't know this, but he says to the cops that he does, and so Mulder's like, "Well, how the fuck did you know about this? You must be suspect number one." Suddenly, they go visit him, and they don't get the impression that he is the killer, but he knows things. So Mulder
Yeah.
immediately jumps into, "I want to use you for what you can understand about this situation." So brings her to some lady's house,
Yeah,
like,
because Mulder tells Scully like something is telling me this guy's the real deal, and Scully has that great line, "Oh, so now you're a psychic?"
and so they go visit this gal's house where they see these bloody doilies, and he what is it? He how does he come to the conclusion, or was this a fortune teller's home? Was my question, because he
Yeah, I think
sees a
so.
spot on the floor where he says they had sex, right?
Yes, yes,
But
but
it wasn't like,
but remember all the stuff that he's seeing, he only sees people dying, so I think he's just kinda, like, saying shit at this point because he doesn't want really anything to do with any of this. He says multiple times, like, kinda like, "Leave me alone. I'm not in this." It's like there's a scene later on where Mulder's having him do readings on all these items, and he can't get anything, and so I think he's just kinda saying shit to try to be like, all right, yeah, here, I've helped you, quote unquote. But yeah, at a certain point, this is a scene right where he has that really great kind of like monologue where he's talking about why the woman collected dolls because there's all these dolls all over the place or something,
and then he sees
and
that meat doll.
yeah, and because that's the moment where it triggers him, where he finally does he says the correct prediction because he talks about the dolls. He's like, why does this woman decide to collect dolls? Like, was it a single moment in her life where she decided I'm going to collect dolls? Or was she always fated to collect dolls based on, her upbringing and her environment and all of that stuff? Was there ever a situation where she was never going to collect dolls? And a big theme with this whole episode is the future. Like, is the future set or can it be changed? Determinism versus free will, essentially, is what this episode is all about.
But he does make an accurate prediction about where they're going to find this gal's body, out at a lake
Yeah.
that is being overwatched by some, what is it, German stormtrooper.
Yep.
And they do, in fact, the following morning find this gal's body. So Mulder just brings him in to start doing the same thing that they did. I loved it. They did it in Beyond the Sea with Dorner, because he starts talking about different various things, like touch this ugly frog item and tell me things about it. And he tells him that it belonged to the lady, that it was ugly, and that its creator was going to die at the age of 82 of rectal cancer or something like that.
Yeah.
He's like, that's a hit. That's what we call a hit. So they're trying hit and miss stuff. Like, you touch this, what do you get from it? Is it accurate? Is it not? Do you remember in Beyond the Sea, he hands him a piece of his Knicks t-shirt,
Yeah.
and Dorner has this huge thing where he actually does say something accurate, but it has nothing to do with the t-shirt. But when he hands him the t-shirt piece, Doyle holds it up and says, "This is just a piece of your Knicks t-shirt." And Mulder looks at him and says, "Miss." Like, no, why are you screwing with him? Because he just nails it.
Yeah.
And then what was it? He asks him. He looks Mulder directly in the eye and says, "Do you want to know how to die?" And Mulder says, "Yeah." He's like, "No, you don't." Like, but he doesn't say it in a way like, "Nah, you don't." Like, "No, I've seen how you died. You don't want to fucking know,"
Yeah.
which
And
was
there's
ominous.
yeah, and there's so much dialogue in about all this stuff in this episode. So forgive me if I'm kind of out of place here, but there's a moment when Mulder's talking to Clyde and is like, Why won't you help?" Like, because he doesn't want to help at all. Like, he's just like, "Leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with this." And they mentioned about the future. Like, he's like, Clyde doesn't want to help because either the future is already written, because Mulder actually has that comment. He's like, "Well, if the future's already written, like, why? would we even try? And Clyde's like, now you're getting it, sort of thing. So either the future's already written, or if he changes the future, it will have ramifications. And he goes through that whole long thing. It's like, well, geez, if this happened and this happened, and maybe my parents would never be born, maybe I would never be here in the first place. And he immediately goes, okay,
All
what can I
right.
do to help?
And yeah, that was okay. So you're not out of order. That was right before he agreed to go with him down to the police station to start doing the hit or miss stuff.
Okay, okay.
So yeah, okay. I'm sorry I missed that one because that was a great line. Right after this, they're in the car together, and I can't remember what they were talking about. But Doyle brings up. He just says out of the blue something about auto. He says autoerotic asphyxiation is an undignified. Oh yeah, because they're gonna go out into the woods and find this dead body of some married guy,
Yeah.
and he knows where it is. And so while they're driving, he just out of the blue says autoerotic asphyxiation is an undignified way to go. And Mulder immediately is like, "Why are you telling me that?" But not like a weird way. The way he reacts to it is like, "How do you know that I'm choking myself with a jerking off?" Like,
it's it's so funny because in that car ride, Mulder's like he's like a little kid, is how I envision. Because he's like leaning forward. He's like, "Well, how do you know this? Like, how?" And the guy, Peter Boyle's like, "I just do, dude. I don't know why." And Mulder just keeps pestering him about it. And yeah, at a certain point, he's just like, "Autoerotic asphyxiation, huh?
is it
Undignified way to
undignified way?
go." And Mulder just looks at him as like, why were you looking at me when you said that? The only thing that this episode missed, they did not cut to Scully's reaction to that. I feel like Scully would have had some sort of reaction, and they never show her reaction. That's my one minor gripe with this episode.
But I was laughing during that scene
Oh
because it
yeah,
felt like because that's what stops Mulder. It's like
yes.
I stop telling my secret. So they go out to the weird Amish people forest from so many other episodes. Like it's the same ferns, the same wood line.
Yeah.
They're just wandering around, and they're like, "Well, why don't you know exactly where this guy's body is at?" And it's like, I don't fucking know. I just know how people die. And then they go back to the car. They start, and it was a pretty well put together scene. They're trying to push the car on this dirt road out of the mud. The tires are just spinning, and the tire ends up unearthing the
Yeah.
dead body's hand with the wedding ring sticking out of the mud.
Is like when they're going through the forest, I think this is a sequence where there's another important piece of information because as they're walking through the forest trying to find this body, Clyde kind of like explains how, or at least how he believes he got these powers, whatnot, and he tells this
Oh
long
yeah.
story about how he became obsessed with the Big Bopper, and how when the Big Bopper died, and he goes, like the story is like the Big Bopper and was it Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, they took off in an airplane. The airplane crashed, and I think it was the 50s or something like that. And all three of these very famous young musicians all got killed. And the story about the Big Bopper is Big Bopper was not supposed to be on that plane, but he lost a coin toss or he won a coin toss or something, and that's how he ended up getting there. And Clyde's whole thing is like, imagine all of the events that had to take place for the Big Bopper to get to that point in his life where a coin flip would decide his fate, sort of thing. It's just one of those things. Like the whole story that he's telling is just so gripping. Like they're all these characters are just walking around a forest. They're doing nothing else, but the dialogue is so strong that you're like, God, the writing is just so good in this episode. So
It
good.
really is. And so, well, okay, so they find the body. They extract the body, and then they're having him like touch various stuff in order, or Mulder is having him touch various stuff to try to figure out stuff like this. And he asks the question, "Don't you guys have labs?" And Scully is so over it by now. She's like, yes, we do."
Yes, we do. And she just looks right at Mulder. It's so good. I mean, I can't like I was just laughing throughout this whole episode, and like all this serious shit is going on. Like this episode, what they're talking about is very philosophical, like heavy material, and yet it's able to be combined with all of this humor, not like overt humor where it's you're watching like a Happy Gilmore thing. It's just like joke after joke after joke. The jokes come from like a real place. Like Scully just saying, yes, yes, we do. Looking at Mulder, it's not some making a joke about Mulder. It's just her. We know their interaction with one another. We know their relationship, and we know exactly what that means. And that's where the humor comes from. It's great.
It was very real. Very
Yeah.
yeah, there aren't jokes written into this episode. It's just how these people's personalities are. And yeah, it was so much better for it. So they figure that what's this or that this guy is a fortune teller. And so the killer's probably going to be looking for him. Or I can't even remember how they why do they put him in protective custody
Because
at
they
the
get the
hotel?
letter. Remember, they're at his house,
Oh, yeah.
and he's like, "Oh, this letter came," and then Mulder's like, or what? He's like, "Who'd it come from?" He's like, "The killer," because he knows that it's coming from this guy. And he mentions earlier in the episode that he can kind of like see
His own
what.
death.
Yeah, he sees it, but he sees his own death, but he also can kind of see through that killer's eyes in a way. And he kind of, like it's like these two weird. I don't know if they're not really psychic. Like the killer's not psychic, but because ultimately what the killer's trying to do is the killer's trying to figure out why he is the way he is, and so he's going to all these fortune tellers, and if they can't tell him the reason, basically he's like they say he's carving out their eyeballs and all kinds of stuff. Like he's this really terrifying serial killer running around Minneapolis. Um, but yeah, this guy sends a letter to him, and so they're like, "We got to get you in protective custody right now because this guy clearly knows that or thinks that you're a psychic somehow because he's watching them from the crowd. Remember at all the crime scenes, the
Yep.
serial killer's in the crowd seeing all of this stuff, and I think he catches them through that or something.
And so they take him to a hotel where Scully is on the first shift hanging out in the hotel room with him. There's this great scene where he's like, or Doyle looks at Scully and says, "We end up in bed together." And he doesn't seem like pervy about it.
No,
It's just kind of matter of fact. Like, I've seen how it happens, you know. You're
it's,
above me, you're holding my hand, you're looking at me with love and compassion, and I'm
yeah,
crying.
yeah.
And
Scully takes it as like it's this weird, like we're gonna have sex and then we have this emotional thing, but that's not actually what he's saying, if that makes sense.
but you don't know it. You don't
Right.
he's riding that border of sexual harassment with coworkers thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because Scully goes, "There's hits and there's misses, and then there's misses." And he's like, "I just call them like I see them."
And so then it becomes Mulder's turn to do the or his turn to watch him. And during this, the killer goes to
Well,
a
well,
tarot reader. Go ahead.
don't go there yet.
Uh-oh.
One of the most talked about moments for X-Files fans, even to this day, occurs because I don't know if they're playing poker or cards or something while they're waiting, and when Mulder comes to take over the shift or whatever, they're they're sitting. He's like, "Aren't you curious about how you die?" Because Scully's been saying no. Like I don't want to know. I don't want to know. And he's like, "Aren't you curious?" And right before she leaves, and she turns around, and she leans down. She's like, "Okay, I'll bite. How do I die?" And he just smiles and he's like, "You don't." And so for like all kinds of X-Files fandom, it's like, what does that actually mean? Was he joking with her there, or was he saying the truth that for some reason, like Scully is will never die, sort of thing, which I thought was just a really cool, weird little moment in this that he tells like, "You don't die." What does that mean? and it just fired off the imagination of X-Files fans for forever. Is exactly what that means. I have some trivia where some of the creators discuss what that line may or may not have actually meant, but we'll get there.
Uh, then Mulder's hanging out with him, and he tells Mulder how he dies, how Doyle dies, where he's lying in a field of poppies or something, some sort of red flower, and
Yeah,
it goes to this
posies. I
really
think it was posies.
great scene, I thought, where he's laying there, and then the whole corpse it decomposes all the way to a skeleton very, very quickly.
Yeah,
I thought for at the time it looked really, really good.
it does until the very end of it. The very end, like the last 1 second of that, if you watch it close, it's like they ran out of budget for the CG or something. It just kind of just bloop fades away. Other than that, it looked really cool though.
But that was well, I liked it. I liked how he
It's
talked
cool.
about it,
Yeah.
how he narrated the entire scene.
Peter
Um,
Boyle is amazing in this
in this
episode.
episode, 100%. Um, he tells Mulder that he's worried, or he saw Mulder die. He tells him that
Yeah.
he dies in a kitchen
Hmm.
where he steps in a banana cream pie. That was a few scenes ago, and I'm sorry that I forgot about that. But Boyle is telling him how he dies, and he's like, "You step, or there's a pie on the floor. Coconut cream. Is it banana cream?" And he starts telling more details. Definitely banana cream. Like he keeps cutting away from the story to dwell on what kind of pie it is.
Mulder's face. He's like, just fucking get to it, dude. I don't care about the pie. How do I die? It's funny. It's so funny because Mulder believes it, and so he's like very very concerned. And Clyde is just kind of like, what type of pie? Definitely lemon meringue.
And so he tells him that piece of it, and then they swap out for a Star Trek red shirt. Like as soon as that guy answers the door
Yeah.
and it's not Mulder and Scully, it's like, all right, this guy's gonna fucking
This
die.
guy's gonna watch Clyde. Like while we go off and do our own thing.
And so he's this other guy, this unnamed dude, is sitting there watching him, and he ends up having to go to the bathroom. He's like, "Don't answer the door," and he does answer the door because he doesn't want to change the future. The
I put
bellhop.
I did put
Go
a
ahead.
note here when he's talking to that red shirt FBI agent. There's a lot of close-ups there because the guy's like, "Can you tell me how I died? Do I die of lung
Oh
cancer?"
yeah,
And he's like, "No, you don't die of lung cancer," because he knows exactly how he's going to die. He knows that the killer is going to come in and murder this guy, but he doesn't say that. But they do all these close-ups of Peter Boyle as he's got like this real look of concern on his face. My note was Peter Boyle has some really aggressive nose hair. The hair coming out of that man's nose looked like it could just come out of the screen and wrap around my body. It really,
right.
really disturbed
Well,
me.
I'm so glad that I watched it in such low definition as I did because I did not
It
get
was
a face full of that hotness. Yeesh.
bushy nose hair. Bushy.
So yeah, okay. So the red shirt, he goes into the bathroom. Doyle opens the door. It's the curly haired bellhop that has been murdering people the whole time. They have this great chemistry, and it fucking bums me out that that scene where them two are talking to each other was so short
Mm.
because they were so good in separate parts of this episode. They were even better together, talking about, well, I don't die yet, or it came time where he picks up the knife, he's talking to him, you feel like he's about to start cutting on a Doyle. He's like, it's not my time to die yet. He's like, well, what do you mean? And he just kind of looks over towards the bathroom door
Well,
where the
also,
agent comes out.
yeah, and what's great about that scene that you mentioned it is, the the killer, he wants to know from Clyde, like,
Oh yeah.
why do I do the things I do? Like you can tell me why I do the things I do because you actually are a psychic. I've been looking for a true, real psychic my entire life, essentially, is what he's saying. And I love the response. And, Clyde just like, because you're a homicidal maniac. And, and the guy's
Like,
like,
huh.
oh, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. It's such like an obvious answer, right? There's no like sort of deep, oh, this happened to you when you were a kid and this was the reason why. It's just like the most obvious thing. Like you're just fucking nuts, dude. There's nothing deeper to it. You are just crazy and you kill people and that's what you do.
It was. I love that scene. Like I love that the Anton scene from No Country for Old Men, where he pulls up to the gas
Oh
station and he
yeah.
makes that guy flip the coin. That's
how,
what I
how much
got.
have you ever lost on a quarter or
Oh
coin
god,
toss or whatever?
it was akin to this scene. I felt that it was so close, and it just sucked that it ended so
Yeah.
quickly because it was good. But okay, so he tells him that it's not his turn to go yet, and he kind of motions over to the bathroom. Then the FBI agent opens it up, and the murderer gets on top of him, cuts him up. And so, as far as we know, Doyle's dead. That's just the end of Doyle. Like, okay, we get down to Mulder is walking back into the hotel from
Yeah,
wherever
he's
he is.
he's like going down or whatever, but he's waiting for the elevator and he looks over and he sees the killer, the bellhop killer, through like the porthole of a door and realizes that's the guy and they begin their chase.
It's a very short chase. It's just basically around a corner and into the kitchen where Mulder realizes, like, oh, this might be it. And as he starts walking, he steps into a banana cream pie. And he's like, oh, he immediately swings his gun around behind him. Nobody there. Then the killer leaps out from wherever he was behind him, about to slit his throat. He puts up his hand to block the knife because he knows that that's coming too. He gets cut, it looks like, or the killer just had, blood all over his hand. And then, like, this is the only time where Scully steps out of a freight elevator behind him and just immediately draws and fires on the
Yeah.
guy. Like, all of this previous hesitation where she gets fucked up or gets drawn on or whatever because she pulls out a gun to protect herself and she doesn't shoot. But when it comes to Mulder, she just doesn't even think about it. Just guns the dude.
Well, isn't there like a moment where where the killer stops? Like, right, he's about to kill Mulder, and he sees Scully, and I thought she said something, and then he goes to swing his arm down, and she just fucking takes him down, like boom, 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 kills
I
him.
remember that, or he got on, or they struggle. He gets on top of him. The elevator door opens. I think she already has her gun in her hand, and she says freeze, and he just raises the knife, and she just blasts him. Like
Yeah.
no waiting, no hesitation, just guns the dude down.
So my
Fine.
question to you here, because I wrote this down, I wanted to ask you, what does this kitchen scene mean for the overall episode? Because Clyde's whole thing was it's like you can't really change the future, but if you can change the future, it's going to have all kinds of weird ramifications that we don't know of. Clearly, we actually see Mulder get his throat slit in Clyde's vision earlier in the episode when he's talking to him about it. So, does the fact that he told Mulder that's kind of, well, he doesn't even tell Mulder because Mulder's like, what happens? And he's like, nothing, just, the visions of a madman. He doesn't actually tell Mulder that he gets his throat slit right there. So, but in that earlier vision, Mulder never turns around. But in this one, Mulder steps into the pie, remembers what he was told, and then turns around, but then the guy's behind him and stops. And then Scully shows up and kills the guy, and the killer literally says, "This is not how it's supposed to end," when Scully shot him, and he falls back and dies. So I'm curious as to what you think. Do you think that the future is written already, and this is how it was always supposed to play out? Or do you think that the actions that Clyde took or didn't take, didn't not telling Mulder that that's what happened to him, somehow the butterfly effect changed Mulder's history and how this all played out?
I think that was his intention from the moment that he came to the agreement to help them out when he decided that if he changes events, they may result in him not being born. He
Okay.
makes the conscious decision as of that point to help out and change the future.
Okay. And I guess that would make sense with what we ultimately find out what happens with him as well, because clearly he knows early on what happens to him, and we'll get there, but sort of like his own demise is what he told Scully.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, no, because that happened how it was supposed to happen.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like
Yeah.
he clearly saw Mulder's death early in the episode. He clearly tells Scully how he's going to die and what happens, because that's the whole point at the end of this episode is it happened exactly how he said it was going to happen. But he didn't actually tell Mulder how he was going to die, but he told Scully how he was going to die. So it's just interesting things to think about. As I was kind of like, after I watched this, I was just kind of like, how, okay, so what does it ultimately mean?
I,
Because that's the whole question of the episode,
well,
determinism versus free will.
it was also happenstance too because he tells him about the pie, right?
Yeah.
But in the vision, the killer was always behind him with that
Right.
knife.
Right.
When he steps in the pie and then whips around, like the killer was still behind him.
Well, the killer was behind him from a different spot. So if you're looking one way and you step down in the pie and you're looking straight down at the pie, in the original vision, he has Mulder does not turn around, so the guy's directly behind him right there. But what actually happens to Mulder is he steps in the pie, and you see Mulder have that realization that he remembers the pie story, which causes him to turn to where the killer would have been in the first vision, because that's what Mulder did to try to stop it. He turned real quick, but then in this version of reality, the killer was actually in front of Mulder somewhere off camera. Like Mulder stepped in the pie, but the guy was actually in front of him, because when he turns, the guy comes up from behind him when he's facing the opposite direction.
But
So
why would the
he still came from behind him both times. That's why I was asking you what you thought of it, because it was one of those things that made me think of
but
what
he
actually
also
happened.
sent or doesn't Doyle send Scully down the elevator too?
I think so.
I think she makes mention that Doyle told me to come down the elevator
Yeah,
or the
yeah.
freight
So
elevator.
all of this clearly played out how it was supposed to. I was just confused about that initial vision with Mulder in the pie, where he gets his throat slit. Why that changed? Was that the actual way that Mulder was going to die? Because he also mentions the autoerotic asphyxiation, the gag in the car, and looks at Mulder. He's like, "What do you mean that's how I'm going to die?" So he's seeing like multiple deaths for Mulder in different ways, but I'm wondering if that proves that the future can be changed, because his whole comment earlier on is like, if the future's set in stone, why do we even bother trying to change it? And Clyde is like, that's the point. Why should I even get involved? You can't change the future at all. But it seems like you can change the future, and maybe at a certain point he came to that realization in the course of this episode. I don't know when that moment was. I don't know if I missed it. But I don't know. Maybe I'm talking crazy. Leave a comment, folks. If any of you guys think, if any of you guys have any ideas on what exactly happened here, if the future was changed, or if this is how it was always supposed to go, leave a comment down below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
And so we progress from the killer dying into basically the saddest ending that's been in the show so far.
Don't forget, don't forget about Queequeg, the Pomeranian. And I
Yeah,
say Queequeg because Queequeg comes back in Quagmire. So earlier in the episode, he sees Queequeg eating the old bitch lady because he knows she's going to die. But when they're walking back, he's got a note there for Scully, like, "Hey,
on
here's the
his
dog."
apartment door.
yeah, here's the dog. Be sure you take this dog, so to speak. And we see this dog, who Scully subsequently names Queequeg, throughout various spots in the course of this season, culminating in Quagmire, which I can't wait to talk about.
Yeah, and he asks Scully to forgive the dog for what the dog did
Yeah.
to the old lady's dead body, but
Mhm.
mentions that there's an old dead woman in the apartment across the way. And then they go into his apartment. They find that he's committed suicide by swallowing a bunch of pills and tying a bag over his head. They have the scene where Scully is in bed with him. She sits down with him. She holds his hand, and the sweat inside of the bag is like streaming down his face like tears. So that prediction was accurate, and it
Yep.
was sad
It's a hit.
as fuck.
Yeah. It's very, very sad. This episode is probably as close to perfect for me as an X Files episode can get, telling sort of like its own isolated kind of story. I don't really have any complaints about anything in this episode. I thought the acting was incredible from everybody involved. I thought that the story was great. This is an episode that clearly made me think after I watched it. And I've seen this multiple times in the past, and I've always loved this episode. And just watching it again, the older you get as well, when you see this when you're young, certain things don't hit as much as they do as you're getting older and you start seeing sort of like death around you and things of that nature. In my mid-ish 30s, and you start thinking like, you're seeing people around you starting to pass away. They're getting to that age, whether it's grandparents or other people that friends and things of that nature. And it's just like you watch something like this, and it's sad, but there's also this kind of like optimistic streak to this thing. It's like, well, you can change things. You can almost make things better in a way, whether it's internally for yourself or for others. You can change the future, so to speak. Um, I don't know. Incredible episode for me. I'm curious what your thoughts are, since this is kind of like the first time you remember watching this. Take it away.
I thought that Fox Mulder got carried acting wise through this episode. Not that he did anything bad, and or he wasn't really center stage like he is in so many of the other episodes because of Doyle and even Scully in the background, kind of, and the killer. Like everybody was just so great in their dialogue and how meaningful everything was. And I'm in the same boat as you. There was nothing that I really didn't like about this episode. Just that end scene where the killer and the or Doyle meet. It
Yeah.
was so good. It bothered me that it ended so quickly because I wanted them two to like to meet more
Yeah.
about and have more of a that psychotic conversation because it was just delicious.
Yeah. There's another joke in this that we forgot to mention. It's when Clyde asks to see Mulder and Scully's badges when they take him to this place. He's like, "Can I see your badges again?" And Scully's like, "I don't blame you," and shows it. And he looks at Mulder's. He's like, "You expect me to believe you're an agent with that name?" And
Yeah.
just the look on Mulder's face was like,
Got me.
it was so good. It was so good. Yeah, for me, S tier episode. I mean, this is fantastic. This is going to be in my top 5 at the end of the year for sure. I mean, I can't imagine anything knocking this thing out. But trivia, IMDb trivia, Wikipedia info. This episode, and I think you might find some of this stuff interesting here. This episode was the second of 4 episodes written for the series by Darren Morgan. During its initial run, Morgan had previously written the second season episode Humbug, which was a stylistic break from the series norm, being more overtly humorous. After working on said episode, Morgan worried that he had written the script, quote, the wrong way, so he decided to write a more traditional X-Files story for next time. So that's why he wrote this one. To get inspiration, Morgan watched the first season. Well, let me ask you, of the episodes in the first season, which episode do you think that he would have watched to get inspiration for this? Is there any that comes to mind to you?
This one, God, I'd have to flip through all my notes from the first season. Let me
Okay, I'll
see.
spoil it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Beyond the Sea
Oh no,
was
shit.
the one,
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
Which features an unreliable criminal who claims to have psychic powers. Morgan was struck by the story and its tone and sought to write a script that emulated its overall feel. Initially, Morgan was leery about focusing too much on humor, so he decided to make his episode very dark. In the end, however, he decided to lighten some of the mood by adding in some jokes. The tone of the episode was also affected by Morgan suffering from depression, which led to him developing a plot in which the main character kills himself in the end. And I have read, there's not a whole lot out there on Darren Morgan, not a lot of interviews and stuff like that, but just from the things I've read, it seems like because he basically left the X Files after this season, and it appears because not only the depression, but apparently he was suicidal during this time as well. Like he had suicidal ideation, and he wrote a lot of that into Clyde's character, which probably explain he was cathartic trying to get some of this stuff out through that character, which just makes it hit even more. That the writer it's just such a personal story for him as well. Bruckman's cryptic prediction that Scully would not die, quote, sent fans into a frenzy, unquote, due to its implications. Morgan claimed that Bruckman knew full well how Scully would die, but decided to withhold the information simply because he liked her. However, many interpreted the line to mean that Scully could not actually die and was, in essence, immortal. Frank Spotnitz later argued that this subplot was bookended by the sixth season episode Tithonus, which showed Scully starting to die only to have her come back, fulfilling Bruckman's prophecy. Spotnitz later called this ending, quote, very satisfying, unquote. However, in 2011, he seemed to suggest that Scully was in fact immortal. This interpretation was seemingly verified by series creator Chris Carter in a 2014 interview. So that's what I'm saying. Like over so many years, it's like that line was Clyde being truthful when he told Scully like you don't die. It seems now that even Chris Carter is on that bandwagon. To me, that seems a little goofy. Like how you explain that Scully is suddenly immortal, unless it's some weird, alien DNA or something that.
And that's what I think it probably, or that's where my mind goes. Is
Yeah,
the clones of Mulder's sister everywhere, like with her abduction and spoilers for some. I'm not even going to get into it, but what
yeah,
happens in futures about that abduction? Like, okay, maybe she's just continuously perpetuated by the alien clone hybrids. I don't know.
yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe it's just fun stuff to think about for fans of the show. Bruckman's quip about Fox Mulder dying of autoerotic asphyxiation was inspired both by the previous references in the series to Mulder's enjoyment of pornography, as well as a book that Morgan had read about homicide investigations. Morgan later noted that while Bruckman's line may have been prophetic, he added it simply to be funny. So I guess he didn't intend to show, but Mulder's reaction, you could tell David Duchovny played that like,
So good.
how do you know I'm I'm doing this sort of thing. The titular character, who was based on Morgan's depressive father, was originally written with Bob Newhart in mind, but Peter Boyle was later cast. Although Chris Carter preferred to hire lesser known individuals for the show, he believed Boyle to be such a gifted character actor that he made an exception. Thank God. One of the great decisions by Chris Carter there. The character of the stupendous Yappy, whom Morgan described as a cross between Uri Geller and the amazing Kreskin, was specifically written for Jap Broker, David Duchovny's stand in. Visual effects producer Matt Beck and Toby Lindala created the elaborate dream sequence in which Bruckman's body decomposes. To create the effect, the design team rigged up a dummy with a skeleton made out of copper wiring. The team then covered this frame with gelatinous skin and heated the wiring. This melted the skin, creating the illusion that the body was disintegrating. The entire sequence comprised 8 discrete segments, some of which featured Boyle in makeup, some the dummy, and some a CGI skeleton. And then Clyde Bruckman's final Repose has been critically lauded. The success of the episode led it to earning 2 Primetime Emmy Awards. Writer Darren Morgan won the Emmy for Outstanding Writing in a Drama Series, and Peter Boyle won the Emmy for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series. Since its original airing, critics have listed Clyde Bruckman's final Repose among the best X Files episodes. Rolling Stone put it at number 1 in the article The X-Files Every Episode Ranked Worst to Best, calling it a, quote, heartbreaking masterpiece and television perfection, unquote. TV Guide called it the 10th greatest episode in television history. And review website IGN named it the best standalone X-Files episode of the entire series, writing that the episode, quote, is a distinctive episode of the series, mixing a healthy amount of humor with some very nasty business in just 44 minutes. Boyle creates a fully formed character who makes a big impact in this one in his one and only appearance. So there you go, folks. I mean, there's nothing more we can really say about that. You got to go watch this. This is an amazing episode. You could watch this as a standalone episode, even if you've never seen the X-Files before. You could just fire this up. If you know anybody out there who's like, oh, maybe on the fence, you're like, oh, X-Files sounds kind of nice. Is there something that I could watch just to sort of see if it's something I'd be down for? I mean, I've done this in the past. I've recommended this episode for people to really get into. So, any final thoughts on this episode, Jeremy?
Great episode. Loved it from beginning to end. It put to rest my fears that we weren't going to get above the high water mark that was the first 2 episodes.
Okay, so yeah, leave a comment down below, everyone. Let us know what you thought of this episode, and if it lives up to the hype for you as much as it did for us. So next week we're going to be talking about episode 5 of the season, which will be called The List, and I think this happens to do with some sort of serial killer in prison or something, if I remember correctly. But we will find out next Friday. Take it easy, everybody.